She watched her ex-husband marry another woman while holding their child, until a wounded outlaw offered her shelter. Some scars never fade, they just settle in, quiet and deep. The day June Harper stood at the back of the churchyard, holding her baby, watching her ex-husband slip a ring on another woman's finger, the whole town turned away, like she'd never been real. But when a wounded outlaw stumbled onto her porch, June realized, out here sometimes it just takes one person willing to stay to change everything. The bell at Coyote Bend tolled noon, slicing through the thin air and setting the town's stray dogs to howling. June Harper stood at the back edge of the churchyard, holding her daughter close. The child's little hands curled like question marks around her shawl. She hadn't meant to come. It would have been easier to stay gone, to let her name fade beneath the dust and talk, to accept what the law and the preacher had already written on paper. Gone, presumed dead, not a wife anymore. But some wounds demand witnesses. She watched as Ephraim Hale, with the same slow, studied way he'd once taken her hand, now took Lydia Vale's. There was nothing fancy in it, just the honest sun glaring off the whitewashed boards, and Lydia's smile stretching too wide, as if she was afraid it might crack. The preacher's voice, old Whitlow, who'd baptized June and buried her mother, carried steady over the crowd, every word clear as a bullet's flight, for better, the better, for worse, in sickness and in health. No one said June's name. No one met her eyes except Mrs. Talbot, who glanced over with that quick, guilty look reserved for lost causes and stray dogs. June kept her chin level, swallowing the ache in her throat. She'd done her share of fading into walls, but there was a limit. She wanted Ephraim to see her, not just as a shadow in his memory, but standing there, boots caked in red dust, child in her arms, alive and changed. The moment Ephraim's eyes slid across the crowd and landed on her, it was like the world paused. He flinched, just a tick, enough for June to notice, and enough to know that he did, in fact, remember. Lydia didn't see. She was busy waiting for the ring, for the promise. The preacher pressed on, and Ephraim slid the band onto Lydia's finger with the same hands that once mended fence wire on Willow Spring. June felt the sting deep, bone deep, and still she held steady, her silence heavy as a sack of wet earth. The church bell rang again. Someone coughed, a dog barked, then fell silent. It was done. No one spoke to her. Pastor Whitlow shot her a look as he signed the register, one hand trembling just enough to betray his guilt. June watched the ink dry, knowing it was her erasure made legal, official, permanent. She adjusted Evie's blanket, felt the weight of her daughter settle in, and turned away. Her boots scraped the dry path, kicking up old dust and newer shame. She could feel the eyes of the whole, town-burning holes in her back, even as they pretended she'd never been there. The child, sensing the shift, stopped fussing and grew still, her head heavy against June's shoulder. Sometimes silence is worse than scorn. At the edge of the yard, June paused, just long enough to let the wind run wild through her hair and the sagebrush. She slipped her hand into her coat pocket and felt the cool, battered ring she'd worn once, the one she hadn't managed to sell. The church doors closed behind her, leaving only the echo of vows never meant for her anymore, and the slow, final hush that falls after a gun's been fired, and there's nothing left to do but walk away. She did not look back. June walked the long way home, skirting Main Street where the saloon boys eyed everything with mean, sunburnt faces. The Willow Spring Ranch was nothing but a shadow now, just a scar of land, wind-blown fence posts, cattle guard rusted through, a lean-to barely standing. The only welcome was the hush of grass in the wind and the slap of her boots against the cracked earth. She remembered when this place had a porch swing and laughter leaking out of the windows, when Ephraim's hand at her waist had meant something solid, and June herself had known where her next meal was coming from. Now weeds choked the drive, and the old barn leaned like a drunk against the coming night. The land wasn't hers anymore. Not really. There had been papers drawn up while she was dead. The deed, the water rights, even the marriage, all scrubbed from the ledger by hands with ink-stained fingers. But ghosts, June knew, could haunt a place long after the ink dried. As the sky bruised purple, Hank Rios, the town's blacksmith, a man whose wife had died 2 winters back, came down the lane carrying a bundle of nails and a battered old skinning knife. He didn't offer pity, only tools. "Figured you might need these," he said, dropping them on the broken rail. "Ain't much, but a fence don't mend itself." She nodded her thanks, no words wasted. Hank wiped his brow and lingered, the silence stretching between them, old and stubborn. "I can't fix what's gone," he said quietly, "but you got a right to nail boards together and call it home." When he'd gone, June set Evie down inside what was left of the lean-to, the baby's eyes heavy, thumb at her lips. June built a fire with what she could find, splinters of an old corral gate, a torn-up barrel that once held cornmeal, whatever the land had claimed for its own. The child curled up close, warmth leaking from her small body into June's tired bones. Night fell fast, like it always does when you're watching for something worse than darkness. A hush settled over Willow Spring, broken only by the whine of wind through the fence and the soft, uncertain breath of her daughter. Then a flicker of movement out past the line of cottonwoods. June froze, her fingers curling around the handle of the old knife Hank had left. Evie stirred, whimpered, then settled again. A horse snorted somewhere near, the sound carried on the chill breeze. June's heart drummed hard. She waited, crouched low, the old ring tight in her palm. The smell of blood, thin and metallic, rippled in on the wind, sharp enough to make her eyes water. The barn door creaked open, slow like a secret. June rose to meet it, knife drawn but her hands steady. The figure in the doorway was no threat, at least not right then. Just a heap of man and mud and blood, half collapsed into the straw, breath hitching through gritted teeth. He wore a duster dark with old stains and fresh wounds, hat crushed in one fist, boots barely holding together. His face was streaked with dust, jaw set hard beneath days of stubble. He looked up at her, eyes black as rain clouds. He didn't beg, didn't snarl, just held her gaze, with something like apology already in it. "I won't trouble you long," he managed, voice torn and tired. "Just need the dark a spell, then I'll move on." June lowered the knife only a little. "You're bleeding." He managed half a grin, teeth white in the shadows. Not the first time. She looked at the child, then the stranger, then the land outside, dark and empty as the inside of a coffin. "Stay," she said at last, "until morning." His eyes flickered with something, relief or just surprise. He slid down against the wall, boots thumping to the floor. "Name's Wyatt Boone," he said, not offering his hand. Just the words. June crouched by the fire, setting water to boil, her shoulders squared against the night. Evie slept on, the hush of the land wrapping them tight as old blankets. The barn was cold, the air thin, but for the first time in too many nights, June Harper let herself hope that morning might come, and that somehow she'd be awake to see it. Wyatt Boone didn't stir for a long while. June sat by the fire, listening to the wind worry the loose boards, letting the warmth seep into her palms. She studied him, boots cracked, coat torn, blood staining his shirt in a dark patch that spread slow. She remembered in some dim, forgotten way how her mother used to say that trouble finds a woman 2 ways, through a man's hands or through his silence. Wyatt Boone, at least, wasn't loud. When dawn crept gray through the cracks, June knelt by him, searching his pockets for wounds, not gold. She found a jagged cut across his side, crusted with blood and road dust. He watched her with dark, alert eyes. "You know how to stitch?" he rasped. She nodded, not trusting her voice. She heated a needle over the flame and boiled strips of old shirt for bandage. Her hands shook at first, then steadied, muscle memory winning over fear. Evie snuffled, still asleep in her makeshift bed of hay and shawls. Wyatt didn't complain. He gritted his teeth and bit down on a scrap of leather, eyes fixed on the flicker of the flames as she threaded him back together. When she finished, he sagged with a relief that was half gratitude, half defeat. "Thank you," he managed. June shrugged. "You can rest until you're able to walk." Wyatt's gaze lingered on the child. "Yours?" June's voice caught. "Yes." He said nothing for a while, watching Evie's chest rise and fall, small and steady as hope. The barn was quiet except for the wind and the soft hiss of the kettle over the fire. After a while, Wyatt pulled himself up against the wall, one hand pressed to his side. "Ain't much law out here worth trusting," he said, "but I won't bring trouble to your door, ma'am." June poured him a tin cup of boiled water, the best she could offer. "Trouble was here before you came." He almost smiled. "That's the West for you." She handed him the cup, fingers brushing over his for the briefest moment. He was feverish but solid, the kind of man built for weathering storms. "Why help me?" he asked, not quite meeting her eyes. June looked past him, out to the pale morning beyond the broken boards. "Because I know what it's like to bleed with nobody watching." Wyatt let the words settle, not pressing for more. There was a silence between them. Waited, but not unfriendly. The baby stirred, whimpered, and Wyatt's hand twitched toward his pistol before he caught himself. He nodded at June. "If you hear riders, there's a trap door under that straw. It's not much, but it kept me alive once." June glanced at the patch of dirt, saw where the floorboards were loose. She remembered how many times she'd hidden, even in plain sight. "You got a name, ma'am?" She hesitated. "June. June Harper." Wyatt seemed to chew on it for a second. "Stay as long as you need, June Harper. Just don't ask about where I'm going or what I've done. Some things are better left quiet." She didn't argue. The world was full of things better left quiet. That morning, when the sun cracked the horizon, June found a pot of beans sitting by the fire and a battered canteen filled with snowmelt. Wyatt had been up before her, limping out to fetch what little he could. He left no note, but the beans and the water said enough. June let Evie sleep a little longer, the hush of the barn softer now than any lullaby. She reached for the pot, felt its warmth, and for a heartbeat, let herself believe in a kindness that didn't ask questions or keep score. For the first time in a long time, she didn't have to carry every burden alone. It was just past noon when the wind changed, sharp and restless, driving sage and old secrets before it. June sat on the steps of the shed, mending Evie's dress with thread unraveling at the ends. Wyatt was nowhere in sight, but his coat hung on the stall door, heavy with dust and silent promises. The ranch lay quiet, though the kind of quiet that makes a woman's skin itch. A horse's hoof thudded beyond the gate, and June stiffened. She slid Evie behind her and gripped the old skinning knife, heart thumping against her ribs. Dust swirled across the yard, painting the outline of a man and his mount, a shape drawn out of law and lonesome years. Marshal Caleb Pike rode in slow, hat low, his badge dulled by too many seasons. He didn't speak at first, only eyed the place as if measuring how much trouble it might be worth. His gaze landed on June, sharp and level. "You Harper's widow?" he asked, voice flat as the land. June didn't blink. "I'm June, yes." He studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment, eyes flicking to the shed. to the traces of blood washed half clean by the morning snowmelt. Heard tell there was a man out here last night, tall fella, limp in his step, scar under the jaw. June steadied her breath. I haven't seen anyone but the wind. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Funny, the wind's been carrying a lot of rumors. June didn't answer. She could feel Evie's little hand grabbing at her skirt, the way a child grabs hold of faith. Marshal Pike shifted in his saddle, the leather creaking. If you see him, best let me know. The law's not as patient as it used to be, not with men running loose, debts unpaid. Out of the corner of her eye, June caught a shadow moving at the edge of the stand of cottonwoods. Wyatt, half hidden, one hand hovering near his pistol, watching the exchange with an old, weary wariness. Caleb's voice softened, a threat wrapped in regret. A lot of ghosts on this land, Mrs. Harper. Some folks say they're owed something. Ghosts don't bother me, Marshal, June replied. The living do. He let that hang in the air, considering her for what felt like the length of a long winter. Finally, Caleb clicked his tongue and turned his horse, boots knocking against the stirrups. I thought I'd seen that man die. Once. Black Mesa 3 years back. But some men got a way of clawing back out of the ground. Maybe the ground spits out what it can't keep, June said quietly. He gave her a last, hard look. Don't let trouble find you, Mrs. Harper. It's got sharp teeth. He rode off, dust swirling in his wake. Wyatt waited until the marshal was gone, then came out of the trees, a tension in his shoulders that wouldn't leave. He glanced at June, his jaw tight. Caleb Pike's not a man to cross, he muttered, voice low. June handed him his coat, her eyes steady. Neither am I. He almost smiled at that, but the smile never made it all the way. Instead, he leaned against the old cottonwood, blood seeping dark through the bandages at his side. You should rest, she said, soft but not tender. You're bleeding again. Wyatt shook his head. Rest is a luxury I lost a long time ago. June stepped closer, her hand brushing the rough fabric of his sleeve. You don't have to run tonight. Not while I'm here. For a long moment they said nothing, the wind picking up around them, carrying the taste of storms and gunpowder and memory. Wyatt looked away but didn't move. Inside the shed, Evie's laughter bubbled up, light and sure, chasing out the old silence. June listened, letting the sound fill her up, bone deep. Maybe, just maybe, the ground was ready to hold her this time. That night the cold was a living thing, crawling beneath doors and through the chinks in the boards. June kept the fire going, small and close, the orange light flickering across Wyatt's drawn face as he sat hunched near the hearth. The storm outside rattled the roof, but inside everything was slowed down. Every breath, every word, every decision. Wyatt's wound was worse than he'd let on. June found him shivering, trying to wrap a strip of old linen around his side, with hands that barely listened to his will. She knelt beside him, sharp needle and a flask of bootleg whiskey at hand. He eyed the needle, then the bottle, and without a word, took a swig and held his jaw steady. She cleaned the cut as best she could, the skin angry and raw. Her hands trembled at first, whether from nerves or the cold she couldn't say, but she forced herself to steady, to do what had to be done. Wyatt barely flinched, only a long hiss of breath escaping as she pulled the thread tight. Evie watched from her corner, wide-eyed but silent, clutching the worn end of her blanket. When June finished, she put her hand over Wyatt's, firm and tired. Can't afford to have you bleed out, she said. He managed a dry laugh, not planning on it. For a while they sat in the hush, the only sound the wind moaning against the shed and the click of June's old coffee pot, starting to simmer. She poured him a cup, thick and black, and he took it gratefully, cradling it in both hands. Wyatt's gaze drifted over the child, then the battered walls, then back to June. "You got grit," he said softly. "Not a lot of folks left like that." She shrugged, a gesture half defense, half exhaustion. "Didn't know I had any left till it was all I had." He sipped the coffee, grimaced at the bitterness, but drank every drop. "You're not from here, are you?" June shook her head. "Was once. Belonged to Willow Spring before the land belonged to anyone. My mama buried out past the cottonwoods. My pa gone when I was 16. Got married thinking I could plant roots again. Thought Ephraim Hale was steady. Turns out steady just means stuck." Wyatt nodded, understanding more than he said. He stared into the fire, shadows eating at the lines on his face. "I lost my brother in Black Mesa," he said, the words slow and deliberate. "Promised I'd see him home. Instead, I ran. That's what the law remembers." June looked at him, the pain in his voice sharper than the winter air. "That's not all you are." He gave her a sideways glance, something softening in his eyes. "Maybe not, but it's the part that follows me." Evie crawled into June's lap, head heavy against her mother's chest, the child's tiny fingers wrapped around June's thumb. And in that simple hold, June felt a peace she hadn't known in years. "Sometimes," she said, "what follows us is all we have to remind us we're still here." Wyatt didn't answer, but he took her words like a man parched for water. As the fire died down, he spoke again, voice barely more than a whisper. "Name's Boone. Wyatt Boone. If you need a name that's still worth something, you can use it when you're ready." June met his gaze, steady as the rising sun. "I'll live on my own name a while longer, but thank you, Wyatt." He nodded, accepting her answer without pride or injury. They sat together as the last of the night leaked away, the coffee pot empty, the fire only coals, and the world outside wrapped tight in cold and darkness. But inside, for just a little while, the weight of being alone eased, and the hush between them was not so heavy as before. By morning the storm had spent itself, leaving the world outside washed clean but brittle, every sage bush rimmed with ice. June woke early, startled by the sudden hush. No wind rattling the boards, no distant bell from the town, not even a coyote's yip from the far hills. She eased Evie out of her blanket, setting her on a folded jacket by the hearth, and stepped out into the sharp light. It was too quiet. Tracks crisscrossed the yard, fresh hoofprints, not Wyatt's, not hers, cutting deep into the mud where yesterday there'd been only frost. June's heart thudded, warning her before she ever saw the glint of metal at the fence line. 3 men lingered beyond the gate, all dust and guns and bad intent. Their horses were restless, stamping divots in the earth, eyes white and rolling. The tallest wore a red duster, hat pulled low, mouth split in a grin that didn't reach his eyes. He was flanked by 2 others, one lean and hungry, the other squat and mean, his bandolier straining over his belly, the mark of the copper jackals. A snarling coyote's head burned into their saddlebags was plain as day. June drew back, keeping to the shadow of the shed. She saw Wyatt in the corner of her eye, already awake, moving slow but sure. He cocked his head at her, no words needed, and reached for his gun belt hanging on a nail. The man in the red duster called out, voice casual as a poker bet. "Morning in there. We're just passing through looking for a man with a limp and a lady with a child. Heard tell they were sheltering up this way." June said nothing. She pressed Evie close, her other hand finding the knife in her apron pocket. Wyatt stepped out, movements slow and unthreatening. His face was shadowed under his hat, jaw clenched. "Ain't no one here but folks fixin' up a barn. Move along." The tall one grinned wider. "You Boone. Name rings like a dinner bell down south. They say you got a price on your head and maybe something else, something small, cries at night." Wyatt shrugged, not rising to the bait. "If you're looking for trouble, keep walking. Nothing here but hard luck and bad coffee." The squat man spat, watching June through narrowed eyes. "You hear that, Red? He's got a mouth on him for a man with no friends." Red Duster's grin faded. "We'll search the place, Boone. Stand aside." June's heart beat so loud she could barely hear, but Wyatt didn't move. "Try, and you'll have to earn every step." The standoff hung in the air, heavy as thunder. A tense minute, no one blinking. Then from behind, a fourth figure, a woman in a gray duster, rifle slung casual across her shoulder, appeared at the edge of the yard. Her eyes, cool and sharp, flicked over the men and settled on June. She didn't speak, just nodded once, a signal June couldn't quite read. Suddenly the squat man lunged for the barn door. Wyatt moved first, fast for a man wounded. There was a blur of fists, a grunt of pain, and then a shot. June, with shaking hands, fired the old revolver straight into the dirt by the man's boots. The noise scattered birds from the trees, sent Evie into fresh tears, and froze the world for half a second. The jackals pulled back, hands up. Red Duster's mouth curled with new respect, or maybe a promise of payback. "Next time, we come ready." They backed off, mounting their horses, melting into the tree line, with eyes never leaving the barn. The woman in gray lingered last, her eyes catching June's. She tipped her hat, then disappeared into the brush. Wyatt's arm trembled as he holstered his gun. He glanced at June, then Evie, then down at the spot where her bullet had dug a fresh wound in the earth. "That's the first shot you ever fired?" he asked, voice gentle. June nodded, unable to speak. Wyatt managed a smile, small and proud. "Saved my hide." June sank to the ground, Evie in her lap, heart still racing. She listened to the quiet after the gunfire, the wind, the baby's breath, the old barn settling. It sounded, for a moment, like something close to peace. They didn't stay after that. June packed what she could, 2 shirts, a loaf of bread gone hard, Evie's blanket, the ring she still couldn't let go. Wyatt moved slow but determined, blood showing at his side despite the fresh bandage. He cut a charcoal line on a torn feed sack, mapping the route west. 3 days through the ridge. After that, there's a ghost town, Slate Hollow. We lay low there till things settle. The air stung with frost and unspoken fear as they left Willow Spring behind. June kept Evie close, their footsteps quiet in the hush of dawn. The land opened before them, rolling sagebrush, brittle grass crunching beneath their boots, sky so wide it swallowed every word. Wyatt limped ahead, stopping now and then to catch his breath or listen for riders. June never once asked if he needed to rest. Midday, a small figure darted out from behind a stand of juniper, a boy, skinny as a rail, brown hair poking from beneath a battered hat. He grinned, flashed missing teeth. "They call me Little Bird. Heard you folks might need a shortcut. There's a track under the stone arch, quicker, less chance of meeting anyone riding hard." Wyatt weighed the boy with a look, then nodded once. "Show us." Little Bird led them down a narrow, half-hidden path, beneath overhanging rock, where the echo of hooves would be swallowed by silence. The boy moved sure and quick, never looking back. When they reached a break in the ridge, he turned. "You'll want to be careful tonight. Jackals don't always travel in packs, but when they do, things get mean." June slipped the boy a crust of bread. He took it with a grateful nod, then vanished, as if he'd never been there. That night they sheltered in the ruins of Slate Hollow, an old mining shack with the roof half fallen, the door hanging by a single hinge. June swept out a corner for Evie, making a bed from burlap and old shirts. Wyatt collapsed near the fire, face drawn, skin gray in the flickering light. June changed his bandage with water boiled in a battered tin. He winced, but said nothing, watching the doorway, always waiting. A knock came after midnight, so soft it almost blended with the wind. June tensed, reaching for the knife. Wyatt pushed himself up, jaw set. A woman stood outside, tall, sunburnt, wearing a hat pulled low and boots that had seen 1,000 miles. Her voice was rough but not unkind. Name's Dell Carter, used to owe Boone here a debt. She tossed a bundle, cornmeal, beans, a spare blanket, onto the floor. Jackals were in town 2 days ago, Dell said, glancing at June. Someone's paying top dollar for a child, wants her alive. The name on the bounty, Lydia Vale. She's after you. Wyatt's eyes darkened. Lydia never did know when to quit. Dell shrugged. I don't want trouble. Didn't see you, didn't hear you. She left as sudden as she'd come, boots disappearing into the black. June stared into the fire, heart pounding, her old world twisting again. Lydia, her replacement, her ghost, her enemy, was reaching out from the safety of Coyote Bend, sending men who knew no mercy. There would be no safety in Slate Hollow, not for long. Wyatt squeezed June's hand, the gesture simple. Wordless, outside, the wind shook the iron bell, hanging from the rafters, a harsh, broken sound echoing through the empty town, a warning to any who'd listen. Morning in Slate Hollow arrived with a gray sun and a thick, uneasy hush. June washed her face in a cracked porcelain basin, hands stiff from the cold and the weight of sleepless worry. Wyatt was already up, repacking their gear, movements careful. His wound looked angry but held together. Evie babbled softly, unaware of the shadows hanging over her world. They set out for Coyote Bend by mid-morning. Wyatt's limp grew more pronounced, each step a quiet act of defiance against the law, and the pain clawing at his side. June walked beside him, head high. The ghost town's empty storefronts watched them pass, windows black as judgment. The road forked near the dry gulch, and Wyatt chose the long way around, keeping low where the mesquite crowded thickest. June kept a sharp eye on every ridge and dip. She'd learned to count the signs, hoofprints, bent sage, the hush of birds gone silent. By dusk, the white steeple of the church at Coyote Bend stood against the bruised sky, stubborn as a prayer. June's heart hammered as they reached the edge of town. She could feel the eyes, the whispers traveling faster than wind. Folks paused in doorways, caught between curiosity and the urge to turn away. They walked straight up to the church steps, Wyatt keeping to her side, every step a challenge to the stairs. Pastor Whitlow stood at the door, Bible under one arm, face tight with doubt. June raised her voice, clear but edged with steel. I want to speak with Lydia Vale. I know she's here. The preacher hesitated, then nodded toward the square. Lydia was waiting, dress crisp, smile practiced, eyes cold. She looked at June like she was nothing but an old stain. You shouldn't have come back. The law is not on your side. Wyatt stood taller, jaw tight. The law's got long arms but short memory. Before anyone could speak again, Della Finch, the woman in the gray duster from before, stepped out of the crowd. She tossed a mud-stained flyer onto the steps, a bounty notice, the ink barely dry. This is what you are, Lydia, Della said, sending killers after a child. Lydia's smile didn't crack. A town needs order, not pity. She's got no name here, no rights. Pastor Whitlow's hand trembled on his Bible. June picked up Evie and set her gently on the church's old wooden rail. This is my daughter, not a reward, not a debt. She's flesh and blood, and her name is Evie Harper. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, like wolves smelling blood, copper jackals pushed through the crowd, eyes hungry, hands twitching over their pistols. The air thickened. Caleb Pike appeared at the edge of the square, badge catching the last of the light. No guns in God's house, Caleb barked, voice loud enough to carry. The jackals hesitated, the crowd shifting, tension coiled tight as a spring. June stood her ground, arms tight around Evie. She would not run. The church's stained glass threw colored stripes across the old boards, painting June's boots, her dress, her face. She felt their weight, memory, loss, hope, settle on her shoulders, and she did not bend. Outside, the bell tolled slow, heavy. Inside, the world held its breath, waiting for the next shot or the next word, whichever came first. The town of Coyote Bend seemed to hold its breath as evening fell, a hush stretching from the saloon's darkened windows to the hayloft's broken door. June moved through the churchyard with Evie in her arms, Wyatt and Della close behind. Pastor Whitlow had locked the church doors tight, his trembling hands fumbling over the old iron key. In the shadows near the bell tower, Hank Rios, face smudged with coal dust, dragged a crate of dynamite salvaged from the old mine. Della nodded at him, wordless. She moved with the calm of someone who'd lived through too many gunfights to care about the odds. Wyatt whispered, "We'll set a wire here. Trip it if they try to rush the steps." Della glanced at June, her eyes unreadable. "You ever set a snare?" June shook her head. Della pressed a length of wire into her hands, guiding her through the loop, the tension, the stake in the cold earth. "It's not about being strong, it's about not blinking first." Hank and Wyatt climbed to the roof, scattering handfuls of gravel, laying old boards where boots would slip and fall. The wind cut sharp across the square, carrying the threat of storm, or worse. The jackals didn't wait for midnight. Their leader, Red Duster, led 3 men through the alley, boots muffled by snow. June watched their shadows slide up the wall, her hand never leaving the old revolver tucked at her waist. The first jackal triggered the tripwire. He went down hard, cursing, gun flying from his grip. Della was there in a heartbeat, boot to his throat, rifle pressed cold beneath his jaw. "Yell if you want," she hissed, "but it'll just bring the rest quicker." A shot cracked from above, the sniper in the cottonwood, his rifle glinting, then another, sharper, truer. Della fired once. The man fell silent, sliding from the tree with a thud. Wyatt called down, "Got one, trying the side door." June moved on instinct, slipping along the barn wall. She caught the third man as he ran, his face wild with fear. He dropped his gun and ran for the edge of town, boots slipping in the frozen mud. June didn't shoot. She let him go, watched the red of his coat vanish into the dark. The air hung heavy, smoke and powder and sweat mixing with the cold. Evie whimpered, then grew still, her eyes wide and trusting. Della crouched beside June, rifle slung loose over her back. "You did good," she murmured. "Sometimes letting a man run's the only mercy left." June nodded, breath shaking, hands dirty and numb. In the distance, the bell tower's shadow cut across the square, long and black, stretching out toward the dry gulch. And for the first time, June realized she was not waiting to be saved. She was standing, fighting, not just for herself, but for the child breathing quiet in her arms, and for every inch of ground she'd ever called home. On the white crust of snow, a line of blood led away, fading fast into the night. After the gunfire faded, Coyote Bend drifted into an uneasy quiet, townsfolk peering out behind curtains, the church bell swinging slow in the wind. Della and Wyatt wasted no time. They gathered what was left of the dynamite, old fuse lines, and a battered lantern from Hank's shop. June wrapped Evie tight, nerves raw as an open wound. "We can't hold here if they come again," Wyatt said, voice thin from pain. "There's an old cavalry post out near Dry Gulch. Walls still stand, well's not dry. It's easier to defend. We move before dawn." June didn't argue. She packed quickly, hands trembling but steady enough. Della handed her a strip of canvas, fashioning a sling to keep Evie close to her chest. "It's not pretty, but it'll keep your hands free," Della said, a rare softness in her tone. Caleb Pike reappeared before sunrise, dark rings under his eyes. "I'll handle the town," he said, glancing at Wyatt. "You get her and the kid somewhere safe." As they left, Hank pressed a pouch of black powder into Wyatt's hand. "For luck," he grunted, eyes shining with something like pride. "And for making hell if you need to." They set out fast, skirting the edge of the creek, boots crunching in the frost. The land felt wider at night, every shadow stretching long and full of threat. Wyatt set the pace, jaw clenched, sweat beading on his brow though the air was cold. June kept close, Evie nestled against her, heartbeats steady and sure. Dry Gulch Fort was half swallowed by the earth, walls slumped, roof patched with tarps. But still standing, Della checked the doors, the windows, the old stone well. Wyatt set dynamite by the south wall, fuse laid for a quick burn. June hauled buckets of water, hands numb, refusing to let the ache in her chest slow her down. Not an hour passed before they heard the first shots. The jackals, hungry for blood and coin, came howling out of the dark. One tried the front gate only to be hurled back by a blast of black powder, the earth erupting beneath his feet. Wyatt fired from behind the barricade, Della from the upper window, her aim calm and true. A bullet ricocheted, grazing Wyatt's side as he shielded June and the child. He grunted, teeth bared, but didn't falter. June pulled him behind the wall, pressed a rag to his wound. He caught her wrist, blood staining her palm. "Don't cry for me," he whispered, voice raw. "I made my choice." She met his eyes, fierce and unsparing. "I'm not crying, I'm staying." The fight was short and ugly. When the dust cleared, 3 jackals lay dead. The rest scattered into the sage and stone, curses drifting back on the wind. Dawn crept over the fort, painting the world in cold gold. June held Evie close, Wyatt's blood still warm against her skin. Della set her rifle aside, breathing hard, eyes scanning the horizon. Inside the battered walls, the air stilled. The hush was not peace, but it was enough. Smoke drifted through a crack in the roof, curling slow. June listened to Evie's breath even out beneath her coat. She let herself close her eyes, if only for a moment, and rest against the promise that she would not leave. Not while the world still tried to take everything from her. They waited out the morning in Dry Gulch Fort, every sound outside magnified in the cold. Wyatt dozed, sweat shining on his brow, jaw clenched against the pane. Della sat by the narrow window, watching the scrubland, rifle across her knees. June walked the hard-packed dirt floor, Evie heavy against her chest, counting each heartbeat until her nerves finally steadied. By noon, the land shimmered under a hard sun, heat pressing down on the world like a brand. June caught Della watching her, a question in her eyes. "You think they'll come again?" June asked, voice low. Della shrugged. "People like that don't quit, not for the law, not for blood. They quit when you show 'em the doors locked." Wyatt stirred, tried to sit up, winced. June helped him drink, her touch gentle but businesslike. "You're losing too much blood," she said. He looked at her, something like apology in his face. "You could go. Take the kid, ride for the border, leave this all behind." June shook her head. "Not running, not this time." A silence fell between them, dense as the sage beyond the wall. Della broke it, voice soft. "She's right. Sometimes you stand your ground just so you can sleep at night." As dusk approached, the sound of hoofbeats rattled down the old wagon track. Dozens of them, slow and deliberate, like a warning. June's heart thudded. She pressed Evie tighter, bracing herself. They heard shouting, angry voices, the words lost to the wind. Through a gap in the broken wall, June saw the townsfolk of Coyote Bend, led by Pastor Whitlow, Mrs. Talbot, and a handful of ranchers, marching in a ragged line up the road. Pastor Whitlow held aloft a leather-bound ledger. "This land belongs to the Willow Spring family by water law, passed down by the old code. Anyone with a mind to take it faces the whole town. The jackals paused at the edge of the dry creek, faces hardening. Lydia Vale herself appeared, dressed in black, flanked by two men with pistols drawn. She spat in the dust. "That law's dead as the bones in your well, preacher. The child belongs to me now. By marriage, by money." The townsfolk held their ground. Mrs. Talbot lifted a battered old shotgun, voice shaking but strong. "You'll have to go through us first." Wyatt pushed himself to his feet, leaning on June, eyes blazing. "You want the girl, Lydia. You'll have to kill us all." For a moment, no one moved. The sky was copper and bruised. Even the wind held still. Then, with a slow exhale, Lydia lowered her pistol. "This isn't over. The law's got a long memory." She turned and walked away, her men trailing behind her. The jackals followed, sullen and beaten, melting back into the sagebrush. June felt her knees nearly give way. Relief and dread tangled together. Wyatt sagged against her, strength spent. Pastor Whitlow pressed the old water ledger into June's hands. "Keep it safe. The land remembers who fought for it." The sun dipped, leaving long shadows across the fort. Inside, the hush was thick, neither victory nor peace, but a hard-won pause. Wyatt squeezed June's hand, his voice rough. "We're still here." June nodded, letting herself believe it just for tonight. Night came on fast, the sky above Dry Gulch Fort turning indigo, then black, with only the firelight painting shadows on the walls. The townsfolk retreated to Coyote Bend, but June and her small band stayed, barricading the doors, double-checking Wyatt's wound, listening for hoofbeats in the dark. Wyatt lay stretched on a bunk cobbled from crates, his eyes half-lidded but fierce. "Don't let me sleep too long," he muttered. "If I drift off, I might not wake up." June dipped a rag in water, wiped sweat from his forehead. "I'm not letting you go anywhere." Della took first watch, crouched at the firing slit, peering into the moonlit sage. The night was quiet, but not peaceful. Every distant coyote call or crack of a branch set June's nerves sparking. She kept Evie in her arms, rocking the child slow, humming old hymns under her breath. Past midnight, gunshots cracked sharp from the east fence. Della fired back, steady and cool, dropping one shadowed figure before the rest melted into the night. The fort held, smoke drifting across the courtyard, grit in every breath. Wyatt forced himself up, face pale. June pushed him back. "Don't be a fool." He met her eyes, stubborn as stone. "If they breach that wall, it won't matter if I'm upright or not." Della reloaded, voice grim. "They'll try again before dawn. Men get meaner when they're desperate." June's hands shook as she checked the barricades. She remembered every door Ephraim had ever locked against her, every window she'd watched the world through, waiting for rescue that never came. Now she was the wall between danger and her child. Wind rattled the loose tin on the roof. Wyatt wrapped his fingers around June's, his grip tight. "We're not running, June. Not tonight." She nodded, her heart hammering. "I'm tired of running. I'd rather stand and lose than crawl away and forget who I am." As the first pale hint of dawn touched the sky, the jackals came again, this time with allies, rough men from south of the river, mercenaries with hard faces and cold eyes. Gunfire shattered the morning, echoing down the ravine. Della fired from the tower, her rifle work clean and final. Caleb Pike rode up with half a dozen townsfolk, swinging axes, turning the tide. June held Evie in the schoolhouse, heart in her throat. A jackal burst through the door. June fired once, the world going white and loud. The man fell, and the silence after was deeper than prayer. On the wall, Wyatt took a bullet in the shoulder, but didn't go down. He held the gate with Caleb, the two men working wordless and sure. Smoke poured from the barn, but Mrs. Talbot and Hank Rios fought the fire with buckets, refusing to yield. By sunrise, the fight was over. The fort still stood. The dead were carried out, the wounded tended. Della slid down from the bell tower, hands shaking, face streaked with powder but alive. June sat on the steps, Evie asleep at her breast, and let the tears come at last. Soft, grateful, spent. Wyatt sat beside her, blood drying on his sleeve. He set his battered hat in her lap, not needing words. In that small act, June understood. Sometimes the truest victories were simply surviving together. The smoke thinned, curling upward into the clean blue dawn. The land, for a moment, belonged to the living. By noon, Coyote Bend was a place transformed. Smoke still hung low over the roofs, but the air was sharp with a kind of hope that comes after blood has been spilled and old debts paid. The townsfolk gathered in the churchyard, Pastor Whitlow reading from the battered water ledger, voice strong enough to carry over the scars in the earth. June stood at the edge, Evie on her hip, her eyes gritty with exhaustion but unwavering. Della leaned against the porch rail, hat low, watching Lydia Vale with a wolfish half-smile. Caleb Pike was there too, jacket torn, blood dried at his temple, badge still shining under the soot. Lydia arrived late, dressed in black, her face drawn and hard. She walked straight to June, her voice cold as creek water. "You have something that belongs to me." June met her gaze. "You sent killers after a child. I won't let you near her." Lydia's hand hovered over the pistol at her hip, but Caleb stepped between them. "Enough. The town's seen enough blood. I've got statements, I've got witnesses. If you want to test your luck with a jury, you can start in my jail." Ephraim Hale appeared at the back of the crowd, hair longer, face leaner than June remembered. He didn't speak, didn't move, just watched. His presence a silent apology, years overdue. Pastor Whitlow held up the marriage license, his hands trembling only slightly. "By the laws of this county and the word of this town, Wyatt Boone and June Harper are wed. The child, Evie, is recognized as rightful kin. The Willow Spring claim holds." Lydia's jaw trembled, but she stood her ground. "You think a paper will keep her safe? You don't know the kind of people who are coming." Della stepped forward, rifle in hand. "Let 'em come. We know how to stand." Caleb nodded to his deputies. "Lydia Vale, you're under arrest for conspiracy, kidnapping, and attempted murder. You've got the right to be silent." "I'd start using it." Lydia spat in the dust, but let them cuff her, her defiance bitter as winter sage. Wyatt took his hat from June's hands and set it on her head. Quiet pride in his smile. "Mrs. Boone suits you." June smiled, a small, real thing, blooming after too many years in shadow. "I never needed a name to know where I belong, but it's good to have one, all the same." The church bell rang, clear, triumphant, echoing off the hills. For a long, beautiful moment, everyone was silent. Then a sparrow landed on the edge of the marriage license, fluttered its wings, and was gone. June watched the bird, tears stinging her eyes. She was tired, but she was standing, the earth solid beneath her feet, Evie's hand warm in her own. Justice in the West didn't always come easy, but today, for once, it had come home. Spring came slow to Willow Spring, the cottonwoods budding late, water running clear in the old ditch for the first time in years. The townsfolk rebuilt fences and barns, laughter drifting farther than gunfire. Now. Hank Rios hammered in new posts with June's help, pausing now and again to catch his breath and wipe the sweat from his brow. Mrs. Talbot brought molasses candy for Evie, who toddled through the grass barefoot, hair wild as the river. Della lingered a few days longer, mending the porch rail and fixing the stubborn lock on the old bunkhouse. She left her rifle behind, wrapped in a red scarf. "Give it to Evie when she's big enough not to shoot her own foot off," she said, and for the first time June saw the woman smile. Not sly, not hard, but soft as dusk. Then Della rode out, her silhouette fading into the sage. Jonah, Pike, and Caleb found peace between them, sharing stories by the water trough, both men limping in the same rhythm. Even little Bird came around, his pockets full of things he swore were gold, his appetite finally sated by Mrs. Talbot's cooking. On a warm afternoon, Wyatt hung a swing from the biggest birch tree on the edge of the yard. June watched him test the knots. The way his hands, so used to fighting and patching wounds, moved gentle over rope and wood. Evie climbed onto his lap, babbling, her small hands clutching at the swing's edges. The old house smelled of coffee and wood smoke. June sat on the porch, bare feet propped on the rail, the battered tin cup warm in her hands. She watched the land breathe again, fences mended, fields greening. She listened to the creek, running steady, water singing a song older than any heartbreak. Wyatt joined her, boots muddy, sweat shining on his brow. He dropped down beside her, stretching his legs, with a sigh. For a while they watched Evie play, the child's laughter rising and falling with the wind. June spoke softly, almost as if afraid to break the spell. "I'm not going anywhere. Not ever again." Wyatt reached out, his hand finding hers. He didn't answer, just squeezed her fingers, then rose to add a fresh log to the stove. Night fell gentle. The sky blushed pink, then deepened to indigo. Inside, Evie slept curled on a pile of quilts, hair fanned over the pillow. June slipped off her boots, mud still clinging from the day's work, and set them by the door side by side with Wyatt's. She poured 2 cups of coffee, one for him, one for herself. Outside, the creek kept flowing. The new fence shone pale in the moonlight, wildflowers bending in the breeze. Somewhere a whip-poor-will called, and June leaned into the hush, her eyes stinging with tears she didn't bother to wipe away. "I'll never leave," she whispered, not a vow, just the simple truth of a woman who had run far enough. Wyatt sat beside her, gaze soft in the lamplight. He didn't speak. Words were for the lost, and tonight no one was lost. On the porch, June took one last sip of coffee, letting the heat settle into her bones. She listened to the wind in the cottonwoods, the quiet house behind her, the river's song rising in the dark. Some names, she thought, are carved not by law, but by living and staying and choosing each other, day after day, when the world tries to take everything but your name. In the end, there was nothing left to say. Only the hush of water in the ditch, the swing creaking slow, and the steady promise of a home built by hands that refused to let go. If this story touched something in you, drop a simple 1 or 0 down in the comments. It lets me know you're out there. And if you want more tales like this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. There's plenty more Wild West stories coming, and around here, everyone's welcome to stay a while.